Welcome to another episode of Maritime Health and Performance Chat, where we talk everything from mental health, career paths, academia, and athletics. Speaking of those latter two, we've got a real heavy hitter in both the academic and athletic world, coming to you in the form of Kayla Miller, a national team rower and lab colleague of mine, finishing up her Master's of Science in Kinesiology. But far be it from me to butcher all of Kayla's academic and athletic experience when she's perfectly capable of doing that herself. So, without further ado, Kayla, the conch is yours.
Yeah, so as Matt said, I'm Kayla. I'm a provincial team rower, and I'm finishing up an MSc, so a Master's of Science in Kinesiology, where I'm focusing on biomechanics. So I'm looking at kinetic force profiles and asymmetries in elite and sub-elite kayakers. So that's pretty cool. And I've also coached rowing. So, I just kind of do a bunch of things.
It's pretty interesting, you mentioned your research just because it speaks to the variety of research that goes on where you're looking at kind of the biomechanics of those movement patterns, looking at some EMG and some movement data. And then, on my end where I'm looking at very different stuff, neuromuscular changes based on electrical stimulation, and which has more applications, in like kind of a rehab setting where you're in that high performance sports setting. So, just within academia, there's so many options, even just within one lab. I'd love to hear kind of a little bit more about how you got to where you are today and what kind of athletic or academic influences got you to both your master's and being a high performance athlete.
Yeah, so in terms of athletics, I was a rugby player. So I played a lot of rugby in high school and for a month in university. And then I got injured and could no longer do that. So I was quickly looking to join another sport, another team, because it was just something I had always been used to doing. And I had a friend suggest that I join this indoor rowing group that I hadn't heard that much about, but kind of thought it was interesting. So I tried it and loved it, and then really got into training. And within 2 years, I made the provincial team and then kind of continued on from there, and have now competed at nationals and Royal Canadian Henley, which is an event that people from around the world compete at. So that's been pretty cool. And then in terms of my academic career, I've always had a passion for health and fitness and kind of that path. So kinesiology was a natural fit for me. And then just with my athletics shifting to high performance throughout my undergrad degree, so from just kind of your average athlete to high performance athletics, I thought that it'd be really cool to work with athletes like myself and better than myself. So that kind of led me into doing work with kayakers, the fluid dynamics and things like that are at least applicable across the two sports. So that's been pretty helpful that I can do both of them. Yeah.
It seems natural progression that kin students usually come from that athletic background. It's kind of a nice transition from actually living it and doing all these motions to learning about how you become better as an athlete and how our body functions in regards to sport and physical activity. So you always hear about a lot of athletes transitioning into kin. Was it a pretty seamless transition for you? You enjoyed it right off the bat?
I want to say, yeah. The first 2 years are always general science and you kind of question why you're in it. And then in the upper years, at least for undergrad, you start to do all the exercise physiology, biomechanics, those sorts of things. And the second that we hit those, I was like, okay, I picked the right degree. This is really interesting. Yeah, and then in terms of being an athlete and applications to my degree, it's been super helpful in both ways. There are things that I feel you just can't really understand unless you've been on both sides of it. Both in terms of being an athlete, you can bring things to your professional career because you can at least empathize with the athletes. And there are just some things, unless you've been in a boat, you just won't understand. And vice versa, like being a professional, or at least mass professional student at this point, there are things that I've learned that I've been able to apply to my athletics. So like some of my nutrition courses and biomechanics I've definitely used as an athlete to try and make myself better, and kind of suggested things. I've worked with my coach too to help with some performance analytics and stuff like that. So it's been pretty cool.
That's a great point. Having to have experienced these things to sort of allow you to make the best sort of evidence-based choices from a mix of your personal experience as well as the research. It's great to have all the theoretical knowledge in the world, but if you haven't done something or at least taken a crack at something, it's really hard to apply those theoretical principles because there's so much more that goes on than just the numbers and results and things, things that come out of research studies, right? There's so much other factors once you leave the lab and get onto the playing field or get into the gym, right? And, I think that's something that's lost with a lot of academics and coaches in anything, whether it be coaches of sports, strength conditioning coaches and whatnot. They're working with, on the coach side of things, they're working with these athletes and, they might not have actually experienced what these athletes are going through. So they might not be able to make the best informed decisions as far as building a program that best suits their athletes. On the other side of that, academics, it's very easy to say, based on this study I did, here's the best recommendations. But that's in a lab setting where everything is controlled and there's not a whole lot of outside variables that could affect the result of something. So, you bring such an interesting perspective to the table where you have experience in both academia and athletics.
Yeah, no, it's definitely been great. And I agree. I think that there are definitely specific circumstances and cases where the performance analyst, the nutritionist, the whatever might not have been the athlete and can still apply things. But I feel that the professionals that haven't been on the athlete side just need to work more carefully with coaches and at least spend more time trying to understand what the athletes are going through and how to apply the principles bring to the table to actually be able to use it in a way to make the athletes better.
Yeah, that's actually another great point. To sort of amend what I had just said before, it's not that you need, maybe the experience or the academic background, but it just, I think, kind of slingshots you forward where you already have that experience. So you have kind of a better judgment as far as making decisions to benefit these athletes or interpret study results as far as real world applications. So it's not that you need these, it definitely helps a lot. I'd love to know because I'm very unfamiliar with the sport of rowing. I'd love to know more so pre-COVID, what sort of a year of rowing would look like. Like what's your training progressions and, what kind of competitions were you competing in? And I'd love to hear, because I know personally that you have gotten some pretty phenomenal results in rowing competitions. So definitely love to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah. I cannot speak to the mesocycles and those sorts of things. That's all done. We get a weekly schedule on Sunday, and then from Monday to Saturday we do that schedule. But over the winter months when the lake is frozen, we will train inside or we'll go on runs outdoors. This year our coach has introduced skate skiing, so it's a form of cross-country skiing, but kind of more an aerobic based one than classic cross-country skiing. And then over the spring it's kind of a lead into summer season, so kind of late June through August. Even it goes into September and October sometimes. That's when all of our really, really big competitions are. So, over the summer season, we're probably pulling 18 to 22-hour training weeks. And over the winter season, we'll do 13 to 20-hour training weeks, just depending on kind of the phase we're in. We do strength and conditioning twice a week throughout the entire year. So it's kind of over the winter, you look at building and getting stronger. And then through May and June, it's a power phase where we look to build our power up leading into the on-water season. And on water, it's just maintenance, where we'll even switch into some sport-specific strength, where we'll do, they're called, what is it called? Like strength rowing, I forget what it's called, or can rows, where we literally strap a old rusty cans to the back of our boat and we row against the resistance. Kind of, it changes. It's fun.
Yeah, always important to throw some variability in there, even if nothing else, for just kind of break up the monotony that can sometimes come with training. Now, I know that there's sometimes yellow tape around these kind of subjects, but are you able to speak much about the details of your research?
Yeah, so I'm looking at elite and sub-elite athletes. So there's kind of a baseline where you need to have a certain level of experience or more. Yeah, anyways, it's a threshold. You need to be above the threshold, not below the threshold. to participate. And you obviously have had to kayak. So I'm looking at the kinetic factors of kayaking in the footboard, the seat, and the paddle. And I'm looking at how all the forces relate to each other, how it relates to the stroke cycle, and how there's variability between each athlete, as well as I'm looking at the asymmetry, so the differences between right and left side in these kayakers. And hopefully, eventually, not necessarily right now, we'll be able to look at how the asymmetries affect overall force profile and speed. So currently, my research is done on a kayak ergometer, so an indoor kayaking machine. And the goal of my project is eventually that researchers can move my work into a boat, and then they'll be able to measure all this stuff on water.
It's always really exciting for me to hear about sport research, because I mean, that was originally where I wanted to end up. And just by happenstance, I ended up working on a project with more rehab implications, which I didn't mind because I was able to work as a research assistant at a couple of different rehab centers during my undergrad and master's degree. But it must be a lot of fun to get to work with these high-level athletes in a research capacity.
It's definitely been really fun working with the athletes. I've been loving that part. I've gotten to see athletes train at training camps, and I've gotten to work with them in different settings. So when they're at training camps, even just doing my research, which is outside of their training camps. So it's different seeing athletes at such a high level working towards their goals.
Yeah, you could almost say they're almost like a different breed of human when you get to that point, because just the physical development, the mental toughness and durability, like it's just another level of dedication. When you're taking these measurements, like these force and velocity measurements on these athletes, is there any kind of competition brought out? Are they saying, hey, I put more force out this time than you, kind of thing?
I mean, I think every athlete likes to compare. Like they all like to see who's better than the other one. And I've definitely experienced as a research athletes coming up to me and being like, oh, what was the time the other person pulled? How fast did the other person do? What was their stroke rate? And as researchers, you're obligated ethically to not discuss any specific result. So, I mean, my answer is always the same, that ethically I'm obligated to not tell you, but you know that the athletes, any numbers they actually do know, they're going and comparing it when you're not there. So as long as you're not telling them anything, then you're good.
Oh man, you must be fun at parties.
Oh yeah. So fun.
Making the decision and the commitment to do a master's degree, it's a lot of individual learning, it's a lot of self-motivation, and sometimes it's a lot of dry, boring work, and it's hard to even, bring yourself to do some of the reading and the writing, let alone while you have to balance, nutrient intake and training schedules. Do you have any, tips and tricks for the student athlete? Because I'm certain people listening to this are, whether they're a high school athlete looking to make a transition, or, at kind of a stage in their life, if they're thinking if they want to pursue further athletics while also getting an education. But yeah, I'd love to hear you speak a bit about maybe some tips and tricks or some pitfalls you had as trying to navigate your way as a student athlete.
Yeah, I mean, trial and error. that's what I think most athletes go through. So definitely a lot of trial and error and asking questions from other athletes, like I guess you're doing with me right now. I'm fortunate enough to work with an IST, so integrated sports team. So we have like a nutritionist, we have a sports psych, we have a couple of professionals that work with us directly. So that makes the nutrition side of things easier and that side of things a lot easier. But honestly, just for me personally, having a calendar and putting everything on it is really good. And then getting enough sleep is huge. And I find just helps me stay on track, because then I'm not exhausted and sleeping at my desk all day. And so often I prioritize sleep. That's another thing I try and do.
That's such a good point. Whether you're a student only, an athlete only, a combination, or even just out there in the normal world, just a regular person who somehow stumbled your way upon this show. But Sleep is so important, especially from a performance standpoint, because what some people don't realize is the repair and replenishing functions that occur to allow you to work out again, especially for you who might be doing multiple sessions in a day, let alone the amount of volume you would perform in a week. But people don't realize that those processes that happen overnight after a workout, they're discrete. It's not like you can stay up and only sleep for 2-3 hours and then get a nap the next day or the next afternoon or something like that and get those adaptations and that recovery process going again. Like, what people don't realize is you completely miss that window if you don't get optimal sleep and nutrition and whatnot, as far as an athlete or someone who trains at the gym every day kind of thing. And then there's also, on the other side of that, as far as school goes, there's encoding of memories from short to long term, which is, you know, obviously a huge implication in studying, because you have to memorize and learn all these new concepts, multiply that by, you know, 4 or 5, depending on your course load. And it's kind of the same thing as those physical adaptations. Like, if you don't get adequate amount of sleep, you're missing out on that encoding of memory. And then so all that work is essentially for nothing, because you're just going to have to wake up, feel even more tired, be in a disadvantaged position to learn, and then already not have learned the bulk of what you studied the day before. So you just take 2 steps forward and 2 steps back.
Yeah. And I mean, even just readiness to train, readiness to study, those sorts of things. So I think that it affects athletes and individuals both mentally and physically. Like, I know that the days that, I mean, I'd be lying if I said that there were days I got more than 5 hours of sleep, but those days are definitely the ones where you show up to training and you're at half capacity, so you're only getting half the benefit or even less than half. And then you're going to study and you're not focusing, you're not paying attention, you're making errors. And I mean, I do a lot of coding, and I've definitely had to rewrite entire scripts because I didn't get enough sleep. So I think it's just tenfold, really.
Oh man, I think we'd be here for several hours if we got talking about the difficulties of coding on a full night's sleep, let alone on a part night's sleep and a training schedule of an athlete. I guess so we don't keep it too long, we'll get to sort of the questions we like to ask everyone on the show. The first one being, so what do you feel that you're kind of doing to stand out and get ahead, both as an athlete and as a student? Because you're an exceptional guest that we have, because most are either one or the other, but we haven't had one that's both. So I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on that.
What am I doing to get ahead? I guess, I mean, in terms of research, I'm doing pretty novel research, which is really cool. I mean, currently research in kayaking is primarily focused on the paddle forces, at least in terms of kinetics. So kinetics being forces. So they're primarily focused on the paddle forces. Some, not many, have looked at the anterior posterior, so forward backward forces in the seat and footboard, where the load cells or force measuring devices we use, they can measure in 3 dimensions. They have 6 degrees of freedom. So that's been really cool. And then as an athlete, you know, I put my head down and I just keep training. I make sure that I'm getting my volume in. And something that I've really been focusing on over the last year is not just showing up and completing the training plan, because for the longest time I was like, if I do what the coach says, then that's going to make me better. But as an athlete, kind of doing not just the best that I can and showing up and finishing the work, but showing up with intent, continuing to work towards small goals, which ultimately lead towards an end goal. Yeah.
That's such a good point. I mean, right from the start, talking about just kind of putting your head down and working. A lot of people don't realize is, and this goes for school, this goes for professional life, this goes for just the average person who's just trying to be more physically active, maybe get a good dietary habits going, but it's all about consistency. If you're not consistent with it, it's great to kind of do some crash diet or something like that for a couple weeks, drop, 15 pounds. But unfortunately, what most people don't realize, most of that's water weight because it's a crash diet. And now then they feel kind of that they get that reward, that satisfaction, and then they just stop and go back to their previous behaviors, right? It's about consistency. Actually, I'd love to touch on as well kind of what you said about not just going through the motions, because that's something I kind of felt, and obviously hindsight's 2020. But that's something I feel like I kind of fell into when I was competing during my undergrad degree. Just going through the motions, maybe not doing the little extra work that I could have, not taking care of those outside factors. And I mean, your background in the academic side, your knowledge of that must really help you sort of take those plans that your coaches and nutritionists give you. And not, it's not like you're going and bugging them, but if you understand that program, it's much easier for you as an athlete to buy in than if you look at something on your programs like, why do I do that? And if you don't address that issue, then, that kind of little nagging question in your head sort of starts to grow and grow and grow and might affect your training mentality. So, I mean, it must be great to have your sort of academic knowledge to apply to your athletics.
Yeah, no, it's been helpful. I've definitely tried to use it, especially on testing days. I'm like, oh, this is a power test. Okay, how exactly are they measuring the power? And then I try and game the system,
Yeah.
try and get the best scores I can, knowing how they measure it. So,
Well, of course you want to get the best scores because, I mean, then your strength conditioning professional looks at it and says, all right, Kayla's got awesome power output. Let's keep working on that. Let's keep building that and improving that. So, I mean, it helps if you know what you're measuring because you'll get those results that you should be getting to actually provide proper indications of your development as an athlete.
mm-hmm.
So obviously we're in the middle of a global pandemic right now and things are open and closing all the time. So how has that affected you and your training and your goals in your sport and as well as your schooling?
Yeah, so when the pandemic originally hit, all sporting in Nova Scotia, at least all team sports, you were no longer allowed to continue it in person. So there was a period of time where we would originally be starting to gear up for summer season. So all of our volumes go up, all of our intensities go up. Instead, our coach decided to give us like a 2-week train on your own, do whatever you want. Like if that means you exercise, you exercise. And if that means you don't, you don't. So that was definitely really different. But we then ended up training at home a lot. So we were sent home with rowing machines and got to row, do schoolwork, and sleep basically all in the same small 1-bedroom apartment for several months. And then we made it back and been on and off being together and not together just because of the different waves of the pandemic. And you kind of just take it day by day. And I mean, at this point, I feel like honestly, it's contributed just to making most athletes out there more resilient because I mean, previously and still going on, you just don't know the progression of how things are going. You don't know what competitions are going to be running. You can speculate as much as you want, but that's just an additional amount of stress. And I mean, kind of similar with academics, there was a period of time where I was gearing up to start in-person research and they said, no in-person research. But luckily, between the waves, I managed to get all my collections in. Yeah, and it's just been a lot of doing everything in the same confined space. So
Yeah, I mean, I really hope you and your teammates are at least like each other a little bit if you gotta stay in a 1-bedroom apartment together. Yeah, I like the point that you made about really bringing out the resiliency in athletes. And I mean, this really, it's across the board for people just in their jobs and their personal lives and their hobbies, right? Like it's really forcing people to have a little bit of resiliency, a little bit of mental toughness to kind of now, it's a lot more fun to go work out in a gym than it is to do push-ups at home. But when the gym's closed, sometimes you need that little inner voice that says, all right, come on, today's the day. We're doing our at-home workouts. For people who are unfamiliar with that stuff, if you're looking for some at-home workouts, I can shameless plug and pop over to my Instagram page there, which is plugged on the graphic for some home workouts. But I mean, YouTube is always a great resource. Like if you just plug in body weight exercise for at home, I bet you can find just a plethora of them. Speaking of shameless plugs, Kayla, as we wrap up here, is there anything you want to highlight? Do you need to get any more research participants? Any programs or anything, any competitions upcoming you like to highlight or any social pages?
I don't really have many professional social pages. Yeah, and then I'm done recruitment. So at this point, it's just my head's down. I'm just plugging forward.
No shameless plugs on Kayla's end. Always very humble. Well,
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kayla, for joining us today and volunteering your time to give a little bit of your knowledge and experience. And I'm certain there's people out there who are in similar positions, or even if they're not from a similar background as you, I'm certain there's things that they can apply to their everyday life. So again, thank you very much for joining us today.
Of course.
All right, folks, that's all for the Maritime Health and Performance Chat for this week. We'll see you next time.